Hello, everyone, and welcome to our teach-in today on community legal advocates. We are excited for our conversation with the panel, and we especially welcome our panelists and friends from Kenya. I'm very pleased to welcome our moderator today, Sukti Dital. She is the Executive Director of the Robert and Helen Bernstein Institute for Human Rights at New York University Law School, and she's also supervising attorney with Global Justice Clinic at NYU. Sukti has deep humanitarian law experience in research, education, advocacy, and human rights work. And with that, I turn it over to you, Sukti, to welcome our panel.
Thank you so much, Pat, and good morning and good evening to our Kenyan friends. My name is Sukti, as Pat mentioned, and it's a total privilege to be a moderator for today's Justice Power Teach-In on community legal advocates. Justice Power Teach-Ins are done in partnership with the Bernstein Institute, which is a center at NYU Law School dedicated to advancing human rights through legal empowerment research, advocacy, and education. The Immigration Advocates Network, which is an organization that you all know harnesses the power of technology and collaboration to support immigrants and their allies, and a Justice Power Network partner. Today, that partner is Vista and our friends in Kenya, Kituo cha Sheria. So I'll briefly introduce the panel topic, the speakers, and the format, and then we will get started. So today, we're going to learn about community legal advocates, those who advance the rights of migrants and refugees in the US around the globe. And they're often referred to as community paralegals, as you'll hear from Kitua's presentation, in the global context. And these are paraprofessionals who provide legal rep and information to migrant and refugee clients and communities with the larger goal of making access to justice more accessible. We're going to take a deep dive into two models, the first being the DOJ accredited rep program through Vista here in the US, and the second through the community paralegal program in the forced migration project in Kenya at Kituo cha Sheria. In both of these cases, you have non-lawyers, everyday people that are trained in law and skills and harness that knowledge and that power to advance immigrant justice from a bottom-up approach. And our panelists will reflect on, the importance of building a more diversified legal ecosystem that includes community advocates and attorneys, and also discuss the opportunities and challenges in sustaining and building these types of programs. We'll first hear from Michelle Pistone, who is a professor of law and directs and teaches the Clinic for Asylum, Refugee, and Immigrant Services at Villanova University Law School. Michelle founded the law school's in-house clinical program, which she built and directed for 9 years. Drawing on more than 20 years of experience educating law students on immigration and refugee law, and a very keen interest in how learning happens, Michelle designed and created the first ever online certificate program to train immigrant advocates, Vista, which we'll hear a lot about. Michelle's work has been widely recognized, and she recently was the winner of the J.M. Kaplan Innovation Prize in 2019 for her groundbreaking work in designing and developing Vista. We will also hear from Dorcas Akinia Otieno and Ujuni Ajulu Achala from Kituo cha Sheria. Dorcas is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya, currently working at Kituo as the acting program coordinator of the forced migration program there. Dorcas has an undergraduate degree in law from Moi University and a postgraduate diploma in law from Kenya School of Law. She previously worked at a law firm and with persons with special needs at the National Council for Persons with Disability. She is incredibly passionate about human rights and the protection of marginalized and vulnerable communities. Ojuni is a refugee from Ethiopia living in Kenya, who is currently the refugee community mobilizer and community paralegal with Kituo. Ojuni is also a trained nurse by profession and was previously the head of a medical clinic at Gambala Education and Health Sciences College before he fled his country in 2004. Ojuni is an advocate for equal rights for refugees and asylum seekers and has volunteered for several organizations working for and with refugees. In 2013, he was the recipient of the UNHCR Kenya's Best Award for his outstanding contribution towards the protection of the rights of urban refugees in Kenya. It's such an honor to have all of you with us here today. And I'll just spend a few minutes talking a bit about justice power and legal empowerment, and then we'll get the party started. So as mentioned, today's webinar is part of Justice Power's teach-in series on legal empowerment and immigration. And before I turn the mic over to our panelists, I'd like to briefly ground our discussion in what we mean by legal empowerment and how it relates to immigration here in the US. So zooming out at the global level, there are more than 5 billion people who live at the margins, people who have been denied meaningful access to justice, and that could range from a host of different things, from healthcare to citizenship. And these challenges are very real and very relentless. And many communities are faced to navigate these complicated legal systems without essential resources and educational support. So this idea of legal empowerment really strives to tackle that injustice. And it's a rights-based methodology that centers people in their own fight for justice and creates opportunities for communities to know, use, shape, and eventually transform the laws and systems that impact their lives. Just a briefer on kind of history of legal empowerment. Legal empowerment gets its insights from trade union and feminist movements, which really saw the emancipatory power of popular education and embedding that within a rights framework, and also essential to that kind of collective action and self-reflection. It tracks its roots back to the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, where communities of women, paralegals, so not formally trained in law, were partnering with attorneys and NGOs and churches to document violations, to provide legal assistance or facilitate legal assistance, and to bear witness to the various forms of injustice that were occurring. In the late 90s and early 2000s, it really emerged as a principal driver to tackle this access to justice crisis with the launch of the 2008 United Commission on Legal Empowerment of the Poor. That was the first time that kind of vocabulary hit the map. And in 2016, the SDG 16 was the first time that access to justice was seen as an essential development goal. Today, legal empowerment is a global movement. There's over 2,800 organizations in 190 countries that self-identify their work as falling within this community justice legal empowerment framework. Both of the organizations today that we'll be talking to are part of that 2,800 plus community. So back to justice power. So a little bit of the origin story there is that we all know on this call the immigration devastation and access to justice crisis within the field of immigration, where only 37% of immigrants have legal rep in their removal cases, 14% when detained. And again, you're forcing folks to navigate incredibly complicated labyrinth of technical statutes and regulations that are ever changing with very small, limited support. And the burden's on them to know how to raise defenses and pursue avenues of relief. And this is not only something that exacerbates poor legal outcomes, but it re-traumatizes. And so in 2018, in partnership with the Global Justice Clinic at NYU, we began a journey to document and make visible the work of community-centered organizations in the field of immigration. And so this is where Justice Power came to be, which is a space, justicepower.org, to really uplift the work of immigrant organizations who are partnering with communities to do that know, use, shape, and transformation that we talked about. Today, we're a network of community organizers, lawyers, researchers who are excited about bringing some of that global learning into the space here in the US. So, bringing us to the discussion today, the Justice Power website, we highlight a number of different cross-cutting strategies that these organizations engage in. May it be accompaniment, may it be community-driven litigation, convening power. This is our fifth teach-in, and the one we're going deep in today is around community legal advocates. And as you'll hear from our panelists, this is a strategy that is rooted in democratization, that is rooted in meeting communities where they are. And we thought it would be really interesting to kind of show the innovation that Michelle through Vista is pursuing here in the US, which is a very forward-looking approach to what it means to meet people where they are and address access to justice. And couple that with the Kenyan experience, which is truly a future look into what might be possible if we loosen and we create a more inclusive legal ecosystem here in the US. That is it for me. Thank you again, Michelle, Dorcas, and Ajuni. Michelle, over to you.
Great, thanks. I became interested in this work because I am an immigration lawyer and a law professor, And I went into immigration court all the time and would walk through with my clients, and I'd see all these people who didn't have representation. And so, when you see a child sitting alone at counsel table responding to a judge, you realize that legal empowerment is needed, and we need to democratize access to legal information and to legal services. So that's really what spurred me to change my direction and start thinking about how to create a scalable model so that we could really address access to justice and get people from the community who are interested in being educated about the law to be able to provide legal services. So just to put this in context, in the United States, we know that there's 1.3 million cases pending in immigration court alone. So that's not even talking about the cases before USCIS. That 60% of immigrants who go to immigration court don't have an advocate, including children, and that people are 10 times more likely to succeed on the merits if they have an advocate as opposed to those who don't. So we know that this is a real problem. We can see that the statistics are that there's only less than 4,000 lawyers and accredited reps who appear in immigration court regularly. So that would mean that each of them would have to do more than 325 cases, which we know is impossible. So on the next slide, you'll see that what I tried to do through VISTA is think about all the immigrant families who need legal support and accompaniment. And they would come with questions like, what are my rights? What do I say? Help me to stay here. How do I protect my family? And as I started thinking about, a solution, I realized that there are all these passionate champions for immigrant justice who want to become part of the solution, but don't necessarily want to go to law school. So VISTA is the bridge that I see, that I created. VISTA is an educational program. It's a certificate program that I offer through Villanova. And it's a way to connect people who are passionate about providing legal services, those community advocates that we've been talking about, with immigrant organizations so that we can serve immigrant communities. And so what I did was I worked with community organizations right from the start. Before I developed the program, I worked with them to figure out what the competencies were that the students, that the immigrant advocates would need when they hit the job running. And I designed a program based on those competence. And I really see that it's bridging the gap between the passionate champions, those people who want to become community advocates, and the people who need services. And when I developed the program, I, as I said, did it in consultation with community stakeholders, but I also realized that I'm really interested in education, and I wanted to really focus the education on the student experience and approach it from a student-centered, a learner-centered perspective. So the curriculum is very holistic. I really thought about everything that students need to know in order to be able to provide services on the ground. So it's more than just law. And so I reached out to colleagues in other disciplines. We have, specialists from a lot of different areas who've consulted with me on the curriculum. And it's also very practical and project-based. And so what I've done here is you can see that there's a lot of different course topics, from immigration law to interviewing and counseling, self-care, cross-cultural understanding, case planning, trial advocacy. In most educational programs, students take these courses as individual courses. And it's really up to the student to figure out how all the course material fits together. What I did in VISTA was the opposite. I created educational learning activities that connect the dots. So each activity in the curriculum incorporates concepts from more than one of these course topics. So, for example, when students engage in an interview, they're engaging in an interview about cross-cultural understanding. They're also planning for the interview, so they do case planning. They might write a memo afterwards, so it incorporates writing. So that's just an example of how I've been able to connect these course topics and serve them to the students as they'll see them in the world. So it's much more practical. And on the next slide, you'll see that I've also approached it from the perspective of recognizing, again, it's a student-centered approach, and recognizing that everyone learns differently. And so there's a whole host of opportunities within the curriculum to learn in different ways. So students, sometimes they read or they listen to a podcast or they watch a video, they engage in reflection, self-critique, they critique other classmates. There's a lot of sharing and community building through the program. So what I've done in the curriculum is I've created it in a modular way. It's 3 stackable modules. And each module is made up of 2 7-week sessions, and each module results in the grant of a certificate. So what that means is that if you take module 1, you finish that program with a certificate in immigrant accompaniment. And so module 1 is focused on preparing people to work effectively with immigrants and be able to accompany them in all sorts of advocacy, but also things like helping them get a driver's license or helping them open a bank account or register their students and their children in school. And module 2 and 3 focus on preparing people to become accredited representatives. We're fortunate in immigration because there are regulations on the books that allow people who don't go to law school to provide legal services to immigrants. And there's 2 different levels of accreditation. The first level is called partially accredited representatives, and the second level is fully accredited representatives. Now, in order to become accredited through the Department of Justice, someone needs to work or volunteer with a recognized federally tax-exempt nonprofit organization. Most of those organizations in the United States are either community-based or faith-based, and they've already applied to the Department of Justice for recognition. Once a group is recognized, they can bring on people who have got the training through VISTA to be able to provide these legal services. And really the goal here is to ramp up a whole field of people who can provide legal representation in immigration. So module 2 would give people the education that they need to become partially accredited representatives. And those are people who can represent immigrants in any kinds of applications before USCIS. So work authorization, TPS, temporary protected status, humanitarian parole, humanitarian visas. I have tons of students working with Afghans right now on those kinds of applications. Also U visas, T visas, anything that would be applied for affirmatively with USCIS. Module 3 is designed to help people go the next step. So we need advocates to get into immigration court as well. And isn't it wonderful that there are regulations that allow for non-lawyers to provide legal representation, even in immigration court? Yet there are only 3,000 who are authorized. So I want to ramp up that number. And as part of this justice power movement, really build a movement of advocates who can provide legal services even in immigration court. The program is, as I said, 3 modules. Each module is 14 weeks, and students report that they work between 10 and 15 hours a week on their work. So it's an intense, robust program. If they want to get the program certificate, then they would just have to finish all 3 modules within 3 years. It's an asynchronous program, so the students can work at on their own time. I find that a lot of students log in at around 9 o'clock at night, and there's a lot of activity on weekends. So it's really amazing when you create an online program, how you're able to reach students who wouldn't otherwise be able to go to an in-place program. So let me tell you a little bit about my students. I'm so excited to share. VISTA launched in August of 2020. So we've just finished the first year. And in the first year, we had more than 200 certificates granted, which is amazing. So we've had hundreds of students take the program. And it's exciting because they range in age from 21 to 86. So my most junior student was actually a senior at Stanford University. And so she was taking the program while she was finishing up her senior year. And now she's working as an AmeriCorps in Catholic Charities in Massachusetts. And the oldest student is a man from Texas, a retiree whose family, his wife is Mexican, and he has a lot of Mexican relatives, and he wanted to understand immigration law. But the other thing that's really exciting about the makeup of the student body is that in each age category between 21 and about 65, we have about 10% of the class in each 5-year age range. So it's really very diverse. The students also come from 32 states, DC and Puerto Rico, and 41% of them are minority. Of course, we're trying to ramp up that number because I see this as a way to really reach out to people who've been underserved by legal education, to get training to minority groups that want to learn more about the law. And so let me tell you a little bit about the impact that the students are having already. While the students are in the program, some of them have been volunteering. We've been volunteering with all of these organizations. Students worked on TPS applications for Venezuelans. We have a student who went to Al Otro Lado at the border and has been working there. They're working on all the most current and topical issues. So we have students who are working in detention at the CARE Coalition in Washington, D.C. Highest PA, there's students who are volunteering and working with lawyers on humanitarian parole applications for Afghan refugees. We've been volunteering with Vecina, and my students, just with that one organization alone, the students have helped 200 families and committed more than 500 hours of volunteer service. And again, this is while they're enrolled in the program. There are a lot of people who are enrolling in Vista who want to upskill. So they're already affiliated with some of these organizations, and they want to improve their skills so that they can provide better and more intense services on the ground. So earlier today, for example, I spoke to a woman who was my student, and now she's working at the Aquinas Center, and she's applied for a for accreditation. She hasn't received it yet from OLAP. There's been a delay there. But she said that when she consults with clients, she can come at those interviews with a grounding in immigration law. And so she can give them much more quality advice and information because she understands the law. So that's the kind of thing that people are doing when they're upskilling. The woman at Physicians for Human Rights who runs the asylum program was in Vista. Someone from ASAP who was a paralegal and wanted to learn the law so that she could become an accredited representative. Immigration equality, there were 2 people there who had been working in the office and now they wanted to upskill, so they applied for accreditation. Another group of students who's been really attracted to the program are people from institutions of higher education. So believe it or not, I have PhDs that I'm teaching in my program. And a lot of the PhDs in the program are doing it because they're researchers in immigration and they want to learn immigration law. And then there are other people at these colleges and universities that work with immigrant students and they want to understand the law so that they can help them better. So as I mentioned, the students who started in August, there were a few of them that took all 3 modules sequentially. So we had about 15 students who finished the program having finished module 3, and they're already out in the field working at these organizations. So 2 months after finishing the program, they're working in paid jobs, providing legal representation or supporting in other ways in these legal services organizations. So the next slide shows you a little bit about what people are able to do at different levels in the system. And so what we're really trying to get people to think about through thinking about legal empowerment is to think about unbundling the role of the lawyer and what types of tasks have to be done in a legal services office, an immigrant serving organization, that can be done by people who are non-lawyers, so that we can open up the field and start democratizing the law. So the way I think about it is there are a lot of tasks that someone can do who has a training in immigrant accompaniment. There are additional tasks that people can do if they're partially accredited reps. And then there are additional tasks that you can do as fully accredited reps. And then the lawyer, there are certain things that only a lawyer can do. And then I'm going to transfer this to Ketua to talk about community paralegals. But before I do that, you can see that there's a lot of things. If you look on the left-hand side, the type of the task that needs to take place, like plan and conduct an intake interview, or prepare a client for a raid, or refer a client to wraparound services. Those are all things that could easily be done by someone who's trained in immigrant accompaniment. And even, partially accredited representatives can help to plan and conduct interviews, to assess eligibility for immigration benefits. So I want to leave you with a notion that we should start thinking differently about the provision of legal services and how to empower other people to become part of the movement and really think about empowering the community to become community advocates on behalf of immigrants. And I'm going to pass it to Dorcas to pick up from here.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for that wonderful presentation. My name is Dr. as I was rightfully introduced by Sukti. So I just want to talk about Kituo cha Sheria. Kituo cha Sheria is a non-governmental organization that was established in 1975. And what we do is that we advocate for the rights of the poor and the marginalized. And especially what we do is that we help them to access justice. In our work, we do partner with different organizations. We have a scheme of volunteer advocates. We engage paralegals, both accredited paralegals. We have community paralegals who we will be talking about later on. So we do have different programs in our organization. We have the legal aid department, which actually carries out the public interest litigation cases. And then we have the advocacy, governments, and community partnerships, which deals with community paralegals and specifically those and justice paralegals who I will be talking to us about in a few. And then, of course, we have the forced migration program, which deals with cases of immigration. What we do is that we champion for the rights of refugees and asylum seekers. So in order to do this, we do realize that we cannot do this alone. So we engage the different partners in the refugee space. We engage the different paralegals, the communities, and we maximize on our large network of the paralegals that we have across the country. So I have talked about our mandate as the first migration program. It is to champion for the rights of the poor, to champion for the rights of refugees and asylum seekers. So in Kenya, we do have urban refugees and then we have camp-based refugees. So the urban refugees are those that live in the capital city of Nairobi and other cities like Mombasa, Nakuru, and then of course we have refugees and asylum seekers who reside in the camps of Kakuma and Dadaab. So in order to ensure that we protect them and intervene for them, our key mandate is to monitor the implementation of the Refugee Act of 2006, as well as the Constitution of Kenya 2010. So our achievements in the program is we have been able to carry out different interventions. Like for instance, we have been able to change the Kenyan jurisprudence with regard to the incumbent policy. Sometimes in 2013, there was an order that all refugees, all urban refugees were meant to be relocated back to the camps of Kakuma and Dadaab. And what we did as Kituo cha Sheria is we went to court and advocated for that, and we were able to ensure that the government's directive was not therefore enforced. What we also do is we also help in training and capacity building of refugees, and we do this by offering them legal aid through our legal aid clinics. We also have awareness clinics. We do radio talk shows whereby we are able to sensitize them on their rights, on their different rights, be it business rights. And then, of course, we do what we call detention monitoring, which basically means we visit the government institutions around given border routes. For example, we go to the law courts, we go to the detention centers, we go to the prisons to monitor at the frequency of which new arrivals who are asylum seekers or refugees are arrested for one reason or the other. So what we do is that we do offer them representation in court. individually or also collectively. We also partner with different universities, and this is a partnership that we also want to continue. Those are some of the things that we do and some of our partners that we have. We have worked before with UNHCR, we have worked with the US Embassy, and then of course we also work with OSF, the Open Society Foundation, who are currently financing us or funding us for our new project, whereby we are working with refugee-led organization. Like I had mentioned before, we do work with individual paralegals, but we also realize that right now there is an upsurge of refugee-led organizations. So we are training them, and the reason for this is to give them a voice so that they can be able, number one, to make decisions or to be brought to the decision-making platforms. Like for example, in Kenya right now, we have a refugee bill of 2019. Because we realize that this is a bill that is affecting the rights of the refugees, it is affecting them directly. We now want to bring them on board so that they can be able to give a voice and to advocate for issues affecting the refugees directly. So we are more of trying to assist them to amplify the voices. So what we're also doing is we are going to help establish what we call a refugee justice center. So our justice centers based in the community level, what we do or what the justice center does is it is led by a refugee or refugees who are there. We train them on different areas from the law, we train them on financial literacy, on advocacy, so that they can be able then to voice or advocate for their rights and for their well-being in matters that affect them. So our justice centers are led by refugees themselves. We give them the space and then we furnish it, and then they are able now to be able to assist the community, but of course having the oversight role. So the next slide, I want to talk about community paralegals. Who are community paralegals? And maybe the concept of community paralegals might be something that is new to you and you're wondering, who are community paralegals? So as Kituo, we pioneered the paralegal model in 1970 when civil society activism just began in Kenya. So Kituo is actually the pioneer of of paralegalism, and we take credit for that, because out of that we have seen a lot of other organizations borrowing from it, and now it has become a national phenomenon where different organizations are then using paralegals in order to reach to the grassroots levels. The community paralegals are actually driven from the community. They are people who are human rights defenders. They belong to the community. They are drawn from the community, and everything about them is from the community level. So what they do or how we engage them is we train them, we get them from the community, we train them, we equip them with the legal knowledge so that even as they go to the community, they can be able, number one, to advocate for the rights, they can be able to monitor the human rights violations in the community. And part of the work that I had mentioned earlier we do, for example, is detention monitoring. So what we do in areas where we cannot reach, because like the country is big and we cannot reach everywhere. So in such areas, we delegate some of our functions to the paralegals. So what they do is that, for example, they do the monitoring, they go to the police stations and they go to the immigration offices, and then they do the work that we will have done. We have also told them about how to draft court documents. And this is especially key when you talk about some of our paralegals, like the prison paralegals that we have. And this has actually enabled them to speak for themselves, draft documents, and most of them have actually been acquitted by virtue of them being able to offer self-representation on that. And there's even a leading case where our prison paralegals were actually able to fight in court on the voting rights, and they were actually given their prayers in that particular matter. So we delegate some of our functions to them, we capacity build them, whereby we train them on where there are shortages. Like right now, I have said that we work with refugee-led organizations. So we also try to link them to the different service providers. Now, one thing that we have noted with the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic is that there has been that working from home policy. And with this, most of the refugees have not been able to access services. It has actually been a challenge because you find that most organizations are working from home. And therefore, you find that the few organizations like Kituo, which were operational even during the COVID pandemic, then we handle as much as we can, but now there was shortage of access to services because the other actors were working from home. And so because of this, that is where we decided then to empower the refugee-led organizations, to train them, to equip them, so that in the event that even the organizations are still working from home, then they can be able to carry out these functions, and the refugee community then do not get affected because they have people who are actually working for them and on their behalf. And then, of course, these cases are referred to us where possible, and then others refer to other service providers where needed. So the next question would be, are community paralegals recognized? Now in Kenya, like we had said, we have the Constitution of Kenya, which actually provides for access to justice. And access to justice basically means that anyone can actually approach the courts. In our context, then, we have an article in the Constitution which gives anyone a right to approach the court so far as the human rights are violated. So where there's a violation of a human right, then anyone, and by this is any citizen or anyone, can actually go to court and do what? And demand that the violations be addressed and justice be served for a violation on their human rights. So we have the regulators who are actually supposed to regulate the paralegal work. There are challenges that come or that we have already seen right now. For example, we know that the implementation of the law that has been there is meant to curtail operation, and therefore that is why we are now trying to empower the paralegals themselves, so that then when they are empowered, they are able to offer representation and assist themselves. So one of the challenges that we have is training, and by training we mean that there has been a call that all our paralegals need to be trained, but the question is there is no particular syllabus on how they are supposed to be trained, and then also the legal provider, and then of course the certification. And this is an ongoing conversation which Kituo is actually following on, and therefore this brings a limitation to the work that paralegals can actually undertake. For example, there's a requirement that says that right now for you to actually enroll and become a paralegal, you need to have completed your secondary school education. And of course, you know, there are some financial implications that come with this. Yet we can also know that there are areas in Kenya where we have illiteracy. And you see, like in such cases, when we say that a paralegal to be trained or to have certain standards, and there are those who do not have, then it means that they are going to be limited in carrying out these particular functions. So number two was the issue of accreditation. So we have the accreditation for legally recognized paralegals. However, no rules have been passed as to how this ought to be done. And what we have currently are draft rules, which the government is using through what we have as the National Legal Aid Service. So there's regulation of that, and what you're trying to say is that there should not be over-regulation of the affairs of paralegals. With these challenges that are there, I have just talked about too, because I'm also looking at my time. What are we doing as Kituo? So one of the things that we are doing as Kituo is that we are engaging the different stakeholders who are involved in the paralegalism, and for example, one of them are the National Legal Aid. So what we're trying to do is that we are trying to engage them so that we can have a review of the Legal Aid Act, because you see, like what you have said, that for existing paralegals right now, the challenges will be with regard to the recognition and regulation of some of their works, and then of course access to funds, because there are funds that have actually been set aside for paralegals. So if this happens, then it means that the paralegals themselves will not be able to access some of the funds that have been allocated for the work of paralegals. So I'll just talk about refugee paralegals, because I believe this is one of the key areas and our focus of discussion. When refugees come to Kenya, they either come to the urban areas or they go to the camps. Now, what they usually do, we have realized, like they like aligning themselves with regard to their country of origin. So you can find that maybe there's an area where you go, it is maybe Somali dominated, or if there's another area you go, we have a lot of maybe the Congolese or refugees from the Republic of Congo or the Sudanese. Yeah, so most of them feel comfortable maybe dwelling or living among the brethren. So what we did in partnership with different organizations was we were able to first train the paralegals, and empower them on their legal rights at the community level or at the grassroots levels. So once you are able to train them, we identify them, and then we saw that most of them are usually people of influence. Now, refugees in Kenya usually we have what you call the refugee elections, where refugees and asylum seekers are allowed to pick their own leaders. So you find that sometimes most of the refugee leaders can also be trained and also be taken because they are now the face of the refugees, and then they've been bestowed that leadership role to be able then to also monitor and also assist refugees when in distress. So when we get them from that particular communities, we train them and then we equip them with the knowledge of the law. And what we did, or what we previously did as Kituo, was our refugee paralegals were given badges, so that some of the roles, like I had mentioned earlier, that we do, like detention monitoring, where Kituo cannot be able to go for one reason or the other, the paralegals just go and display their badges and say, we are working for Kituo, and then of course they are able to act on our behalf, and they're actually given that access because they are actually recognized by us. And then of course, with our good relationship with the different police stations and the different government facilities and organizations, then they know that these are paralegals that have actually been trained by Kituo. So what they do is they do some of the detention monitoring for us. If refugees or asylum seekers are arrested, we send them to the police stations just to be able to get that information. And then of course we use them as mobilizers, where when we have activities, we are able to engage them. As Kituo, we have some of them implement some of our activities. Like for instance, when we are going to the radio stations to do radio talk shows, we have refugees who also accompany us. They give the side of the story, they speak to the community themselves, and then of course they also sensitize their community on the work that we do and the work that they do. And then, it's also good when the beneficiary talks to the community, they are able to relate to them. So when we engage them in these activities, we have come to realize, like, even those refugees who did not know that they had rights, or they maybe access the radio stations or go to the police stations, they get empowered, and then of course they know their rights. Yes, so we have a pictorial of some of the work that we do. I can just explain, and then maybe I'll call my colleague Ojuni Ochala, who is one of our paralegals and also my colleague here, to just give his experience and tell us about how it has been, if Kituo has in any way assisted him and transformed him. Yeah. So if you look at the slides, the first slide of the lady on the mask, that is my executive director. And on that particular occasion, she was addressing paralegals on our annual paralegal summit, where they are the red drapes. Those are our paralegals, and we're actually training them and engaging them. On the next slide, we have a man with a hand on his chest. So in this particular day, we were actually empowering refugees on their business rights. What happened is we came to realize that refugees and asylum seekers, when they come to the country, they do not know, number one, their rights. They do not know that they can be able to engage in businesses or start up businesses. And so this is an issue that we saw, and we decided that we were going to address and just teach them on their refugee rights and their business rights. And that is what was happening on that particular slide. And then down there, you can see Ojuni. He was actually training the representatives from the refugee-led organizations. And then the slide there, we can see the men in white and black strip. That is at the prison. So we have a volunteer advocate there who is actually training the prison paralegals. Most of our trainings usually take 5 days. We train them on, legal drafting. We train them on the constitutional law, gender and gender-based violence, family law. They become like all-round advocates. In fact, most of our paralegals, when you meet them, you think they're accredited lawyers, And we have had very many success stories because they know their rights and they actually speak with authority. And even if you're a layman, you wouldn't know that they are laymen. So in the next slide, the lady at the center, that is myself, yours truly. And then the man on the right, that is a refugee from Rwanda. We were at the radio stations whereby we were sensitizing the community and the public on the refugee bill. Like I had mentioned, we had a new refugee bill of 2019. So we went to the stations and we're just empowering the refugees, because we realized like sometimes things can happen without their knowledge. So, you have to get this information out there. And so I was accompanied by, he's called Jean-Marie. Yeah, and that was one of the community radio stations. And then if you look at the other slide just down beneath, you'll see again, that is my colleague, Ojuni. And in this particular case, they were having a podcast. They were just discussing on issues with dealing with refugees. So this is just to illustrate to you that yes, we do have community paralegals in Kenya. And yes, they have been empowered and they have a voice. And our paralegals can actually represent.
Thank you, Dorcas, for the wonderful presentation. Yes, that shows the level of passion she has for the work. And I'm very grateful for people like herself and you, starting from Professor Michelle, Sukti, and several other people who are really concerned for people like myself and many other who are out there. The same way that Dorcas was explaining, this is the instrument of work I can say that you can give to an immigrant or a refugee or an asylum seeker to stand for themselves or for himself. I have the opportunity and still will have many more to come to advocate for the right of refugees and represent them where it is necessary. For me, I think in our initial conversation with the Executive Director, Sukti, I have talked about how I came to know about Kituo cha Sheria. I came to Kenya in 2004. Then the most important thing when a refugee or an immigrant get themselves into a different country is to look around themselves. You are in a new country where there is new rule of law, where you don't know anything about it. What comes first is that, am I legally in this country? So in terms of refugees and asylum seekers, what comes first is that to regularize their stay in the country. So as a refugee or as an asylum seeker who has arrived earlier in 2004, the very first thing we did was to approach UNHCR, where we said that, look, we are asylum seekers from country X, specifically from Ethiopia. And given my complexion and my height, someone may not be able just to easily believe that I'm from Ethiopia. So it took us a series of advocacy and series of work that indeed we are from Ethiopia. And then we were given exceptional registration. I made part of it. And I'm very happy that just UNHCR and the other organizations, they had faith in us. So they gave us that power to register the newly arriving refugees, then take the list to UNHCR where they can schedule them for registration and subsequent travel to the camp where they will be residing. Ideally, when I registered, I'm supposed to stay in Nairobi only for a month. But out of the work that I was doing in supporting the community and registering refugees, when I was almost approaching the final days, I went back to UNHCR and told them, look, this is the document that I was given. I think it is time now for me just to go to the camp where I am designated or where I'm supposed to stay. The officer who was at the desk said, okay, I may not be able to give you answer. Let me go back and consult with my seniors. After she went back, they consulted, then she came back to me, and then he said, would you mind if we register you in Nairobi? Then I said, that is up to you. You are the one who told me to go to the camp, and still you have that power to let me stay in Nairobi. So that is how I ended up in Nairobi ever since. So that is an opportunity that I really thank the stakeholders for. And ever since that time, the very first interaction that I had with Kituo was in 2009, when two young guys were knocked by a vehicle in our neighborhood. Unfortunately, one of them passed on, and the other one was admitted in the hospital with fractures on his both legs. So when we were moving around, we don't know how to go about the insurance, the vehicle that knocked the boy. It was pointed out to us that Kituo is there to assist on legal matters. So after approaching them, initially they told us that, yes, they are dealing only with immigration issues, but since this is an exceptional one, then they had to step in. So ever since that time, I was with Kituo. They took me through different trainings and gave me that opportunity to serve and even act on their behalf. As you have seen in the previous slides, that I was facilitating trainings, not only for fellow refugees, I do also just assist sometimes in sharing my personal experience with the magistrate, the judges, the Department of Public Prosecution, and at times I'm even invited into different universities to share what it means to be a refugee, and that Kenya is a great country and they are very grateful for hosting refugees for this long. I know it is not easy, but whatever they are doing to humanity is something very commendable. So yes, my experience goes on forever, but let me leave it there for now. Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you so much, Dorcas. We really appreciate the way thank you for sharing your story and also for walking us through the ways in which you kind of engage your experience as a refugee and marry that with the legal experience that you've been able to gain to really defend the rights of your community. So there have been some questions in the chat, but I think before we turn to those, one question that comes up quite regularly here in the US and I imagine in other countries is around the role of kind of quality control and assessing that the representation or the legal advice or the support is sufficient. And so could you talk a little bit about, in both of your experiences, how you think about quality control and how you respond to that question of, oh no, you're taking the law and its practice away from attorneys, like what does that mean for the communities that are being served? So Michelle, maybe if you want to start with that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge issue, and it's especially in the United States where we have a lot of notarios and people who provide incorrect legal information to immigrants and then create even worse situations for them. So it's something that's definitely on my radar screen. And I think with respect to the VISTA program that I've designed, it's really one of the reasons why I have embedded so many assessments into the curriculum. So I really want to make sure that students are mastering the material as they move through the curriculum. So, a lot of online programs are very focused on the teaching part of things, but not as much on the assessment. And what we've done in VISTA is I worked with the LSAC, the Law School Admissions Council. They're like the preeminent group that knows how to assess legal knowledge. And they've worked with me to create quizzes that are embedded throughout the curriculum. And then we have a test at the end. And so students are always like, once they learn something, they're getting a quiz that reinforces their knowledge. And to the extent that they get questions wrong on the quiz, they're always asking for why. And so it's really nice when you give students an opportunity to test their knowledge immediately because they're curious. That's at the moment when they're most curious and they go back and learn the material when they get something wrong. So in addition to the quizzes, there's a lot of other opportunities for students to apply their knowledge to fact patterns and other things that are then given feedback from their faculty colleagues. So yeah, I mean, I think in a way that is one of the guiding principles that made me create a curriculum that's so robust and that has so many assessments, because I want to make sure that when students are leaving the program, they're leaving both with the knowledge that they need, with the skills that they need in order to do additional research, because they're never going to know everything, and with kind of an understanding of the ethical complexities of practicing in immigration law. So ethics is also something that's embedded in the curriculum, and really we bring it up in a lot of different contexts so that people understand how it actually comes into play in the work that they do in the field. But I think as a community, lawyers really need to start thinking about how to use paraprofessionals, because we know that we need to democratize access to legal information and we have to democratize the system. I think that this is going to be part of an ongoing conversation that we're having in the United States about how to efficiently and effectively create new layers in the legal services ecosystem. We do it in healthcare effectively with nurse practitioners, physicians assistants, and all the other people who support physicians. We need to start thinking that way to create models for law, and that's what I'm promoting.
So I'll just address it from our context. So for us, like we had mentioned before, there are limitations to what a paralegal can do. And even as they go about their businesses, of course, they need to be supervised. And we are the ones For the ones that you have, we're actually supervising them and they report to us. So what we do is that after we train them and then they go to the community and offer legal advice. And like I had mentioned earlier, we do have a law that actually governs or regulates the work of paralegals, which is the Legal Aid Act. So one of the challenges that I had mentioned earlier was with regard to training, whereby as at now there are those limitations. There are those limitations that need to be addressed, and it is something that Kituo is actually trying to do in partnership with other stakeholders. So for now, the ones that we engage with, they report to us, whichever advice they give. At the end of the month, we actually monitor the work that they do and the advice that was given. And even in the prisons, like we had said, that you also have the prison paralegals, for example, the drafting that they do, we have been able to train them so much that they are able to actually do pleadings for themselves. But even as they do these pleadings, they have to be reviewed by us because, you know, like we're the ones who are supporting them. So we also go and do that. Now that is in our context because those are paralegals that are trained by Kituo. So we can call them like Kituo paralegals. Yes, but maybe unless Ujuni has something to add on that.
Yes, part of the work, just the same question that has been raised, that you are eroding the very profession of law. It will always be there because other advocates who feels that that is a noble field and that should not be interfered by any person unless he's graduate. Yes, they are there. But normally what we do, our very first approach is sometimes is to approach the chief executive officers of different courts. And then after that, just our office will organize for a training with the magistrate and some judges where we are going to introduce these paralegals that they might be frequenting court as part of the training. Like how is the proceeding going? How are some of the things being done in court? How do you refer to your fellow professional? How do you refer to a magistrate or a judge? Yes, but from our end, just what we normally do, before we send them out in the field, we subject them just to our ethics, and then we subject them just, they have to sign a code of ethics so that they don't violate the very operation out there, and then that they should not misrepresent the organization in a way that it will change the name. So with these documents, or by them signing these documents, it will make them to act responsibly. And also we have a feedback session, a very good example like the photo that you have seen where our executive director is addressing the Paralegal Summit. That is part of the session that we use as a feedback mechanism from our own paralegals to improve on the work that we are doing. We will always be there to assist and ensure that just quality work is delivered, and then that they have to operate up to the limits that they are told and not to go beyond and masquerade as now a full-fledged advocate. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. I think it's really interesting that in both examples, there's assessments built in, there's ethics that are built in, there's also, you know, constraints. And I think in both instances, I imagine there's a continuing kind of legal education or educational support built in. And I think someone who I helped develop community paralegal programs in India, and that idea of continual feedback and education is something that was pretty essential, because even if you have a robust, let's say, monthly training over the course of a year, the law changes. And so having that kind of supportive organization is really essential. Michelle, you had a few questions early on just around the accreditation program. So a few things that I'll just kind of lump together. One is, have you considered an anti-racist education as a component to your course because of the relationship between immigration and its racist structure? The other is, can you be a fiscally sponsored agency and apply to become accredited, or do you have to have your own 501c3? And then, do you need association with an NGO even if you're doing partially accredited work?
Okay, so let me handle those maybe in a different order. So the easier question to answer is the third. So in order to be accredited by the Department of Justice to provide partially accredited legal services or full accredited rep services, you have to be affiliated with a DOJ recognized organization. That's really critical. And so There are a lot of organizations out there, and as the other question suggests, there are other organizations that are thinking about how to become recognized. And one of the things that we want to do, of course, is build that capacity as well. So if there's any organizations that are providing services and want to become recognized, that would be something to look into in terms of how to move forward in that process. So with respect to the second question, my understanding is that you have to be a nonprofit organization. So a fiscally sponsored organization probably might not qualify, although I don't want to say that I know the answer to that. What I will tell you is that the Department of Justice on the EOIR website has an extensive list of questions and answers, like frequently asked questions, and that might have come up before, so it might be in the frequently asked questions. If there's an opportunity for me to put the link somewhere, I'll do that, and so that we can make it available to people and they can look at the website themselves. And then with respect to the first question about anti-racism, I think that's a really important point, and it's something that we touch on in Module 1 when we talk about cultural competencies. And of course, it's brought up throughout the curriculum because we're dealing with issues that sometimes stem from racism, and of course, how the system is applied to immigrants also has that undercurrent of racism. If there are materials that you would suggest we consider providing to students, I'm always looking for things to update and improve the curriculum. So if you want to send those to me, my email is pistone@law.villanova.edu. I'm a law professor at Villanova, so I'm pretty easy to find my email address. So you please send it along.
Great. Well, I have a ton of questions, but one question that we think about a lot is around the kind of purpose behind legal empowerment. It's not just to expand access to legal services, but it's about that relationship. It's about building power. It's about building, like kind of organizing and deepening democracy through that shift of what the lawyer knows and honoring what communities inherently know because of their lived expertise. So Dorcas, when you do your trainings with paralegals, community paralegals or Ojuni, can you talk about how you discuss the role of power or the role of lived experience, what it means to do empowerment work? How do you talk about that in your trainings with community paralegals?
Normally, what we do is at the beginning of the program or the training, we normally ask them about the expectations. And what do they expect out of this training at the very first induction? That will give us the view of what paralegal, that they are given every responsibility. So that will help us just to shape what will come next. That has really been of help. The other thing is that we normally, whenever just they are going there to intervene on behalf of clients, which most of the time is supposed to be at the detention facilities, which is mainly the police stations. Normally, what we emphasize is that because refugees, when they are arrested, they have different types of documentation, especially in Kenya, starting from asylum path seeker, appointment slip, waiting paper. All these documents will confuse police. Even if they are trained, they might not get all the different type of documents. So we tell them that when you are going to address police, the very first thing you do, just introduce yourself, where you are, because that will give you now just the footing where to start from. Because if you tell police, I'm from Kituo cha Sheria, yes, that is a reputable organization that they cannot afford to get into a problem with legally. So number one, just having a session to do with expectation, where they are going to list down their expectation before the training or what they expect after the training. And then now just what they need to do when they are engaging with different law enforcement agents, be it at the institutional level or at an individual level.
Maybe if I can just add to that and say this, most of the trainings that we do, we offer different types of trainings in our different forums. So for example, we have training of government officials. We have what you call the court users committee, which basically entails those who work in the courts and the court processes. And then when we speak to the community themselves, the refugee community, we train them on different angles. Number one, we do what we call the legal aid clinics. In the legal aid clinics, we sensitize them on their rights. And then of course, we also train them on things to do do, like, the non-refoulement, non-penalization, like the different principles and the different doctrines that we have under immigration law, so that they can be able to know that once you come into the country, you are legally present in Kenya, and therefore, if you are arrested or if you are being harassed by the local authorities, you are able to present your documents and speak on your rights. And where there is an issue, then you come to us. We also do what we call the awareness creation forums. In the awareness creation forums, we are able to hear from them, and then we are able to talk to them depending on the emerging issue at that particular time. I'll give an example. Early this year, we had an issue of the closure of the camps. And also, like I had mentioned earlier, with the refugee bill. In such cases, you find that not most of them are aware that the law that is actually meant to protect them is going to be what? Is going to be amended. So we use these forums then to be able to create awareness on the refugee bill, to train them, and we even do publications, like we have booklets that we give to them, we have information that we give to them on self-representation, on their business rights, that they can always be able to refer to in case there is need for that. And then, of course, in our documents, we also put our numbers whereby they know that they can always reach us at any given time. And then, of course, you have what you call the training of trainers, the TOTs. We also train them. We invite them for TOTs. In every of our TOT, we have refugee-led organization representatives, and we also have the refugees themselves. So after we train them, we expect them then not to stay with this information, but to go back to the community and be able to also do what? To train them on what they have learned. So we train them on things to do with maybe the law. We tell them about the law, about their rights, about their legal rights, so that they can be able to know that in as much as they're refugees in this country, they are constitutionally protected. Yeah, so we use some of these forums to be able then to empower them and to sensitize them on their rights. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much, Dorcas. Again, it's a model of training and then sharing what you're learning back with community. Michelle, if you can talk a little bit about how you think about that, the kind of power relationship between traditional legal actors like lawyers and the paraprofessionals that are coming out of VISTA. And then, because we're running out of time, maybe a bit of advice. If other people wanted to set up kind of a community legal advocate organization like VISTA, like what's some advice you would give, since one of our goals with these teach-ins is to encourage those of you out there to think a little bit differently about adopting some of these community-centered approaches in your work. So 2 questions to you, Michelle.
Yeah, so I think what we're seeing in immigration is that there's such a extreme power dynamic or inequity between people who are working within the system and understand the law, and the people who are who are subject to immigration laws and enforcement. And so really what I'm trying to do is figure out ways through VISTA and through education to get more information about the law out into the community, so that everyone can then become an advocate and start educating their networks about immigration. Immigration is such a difficult topic to understand, but my students are telling me that they're using what they're learning in the course to then talk to family members, to talk to community members, and they're inspiring other people to come and get educated and to do more, like to kind of empower themselves with the knowledge that they are looking for, so that they can be actors and really advance and live their passion, right, through advocating for others. So I feel like that's a really important goal, and that there are so many people, I'm learning there's so many people who want to understand immigration, but it's just so complex and there aren't a lot of entry points. So what I'm really trying to do is to create more entry points, so that people who are passionate and want to become champions of immigrant justice have a bridge that they can get on, that they can go over, so that they can start to educate themselves and be those agents of change. And I feel like it has to start at the grassroots level. And that's what this is doing. It's really like empowering to people around the country to do that. In terms of advice, I think my one thing in terms of if people are passionate about working on this, there are ways that you can become, even at a grassroots level, just start doing the work that needs to be done in your community. And there are so many people, for example, immigrants, who live in communities where there aren't a lot of lawyers. And so if you're in one of those communities, start a little community group and then, gather people who want to start learning the law. And because Vista is online, it could be taught to people all over the country. I mean, really one thing that I'm seeing through having this online program is one of the goals is to just get out into rural areas where there are detention centers, where a lot of immigrants live, but not a lot of lawyers live, and start to educate people. It's kind of like what Dorcas was saying earlier about getting the information out to those rural communities. And so my advice is to just start, that there are so many good examples out there of passionate people who started either individuals or they started with just one or two people, and they're making such an impact. So just start educating yourself and take action, and you'll find that it will be so rewarding to be in a position where you can serve others.
Thanks, Michelle. Dorcas, in 1 minute, if you could give some advice from your work as an advocate and a trainer of paralegals in this space, what would it be?
What I'd just like to say is that we should actually embrace paralegals, more especially because we know that there are areas where we cannot be everywhere. As Kituo, we cannot be everywhere. And therefore, we have to engage the different actors who can be able to assist us to reach our mandate. And this is now where the paralegals come in, be they the community paralegals, be they the prison paralegals. They are integral people, and we need to actually assist them wherever possible. And they usually say refugees and asylum seekers, they have rights. And because they have rights, we are here to advocate for their rights. And we will advocate for their rights by also empowering them and also ensuring that they are sensitized and they know that they have their rights, and they can also spread this gospel to the other refugees and the other asylum seekers, as well as also the ones in the prisons, so that they can know that even being inside there, you have the option of self-representation, but we have an organization called Kituo cha Sheria or any other justice-based organization that has your back and that is looking out for your welfare and will train you and equip you to ensure that you are able to access justice. Because at the end of it all, what you are fighting for is access to justice. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity, and we look for more interaction in the future. Thank you so much for this platform.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to all our panelists and guests and our moderator Sukti today. Thank you for the audience for your time. A copy of the presentation is posted on our site at immigrationadvocates.org on the homepage in the lower right corner, the alerts section. Thank you once again.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much, Dorcas, Adrienne, Michelle, and Pat. Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for having us, and we hope to see you soon again.
Yes, yes. And visit justicepower.org to learn more.